chapter 1 of volume 2 of Pride and Prejudice. If your book is not divided into volumes, this would be chapter 24. All right. Miss Bingley's letter arrived and put an end to doubt. The very first sentence conveyed the assurance of their being all settled in London for the winter, and concluded with her brother's regret at not having had time to pay his respects to his friends in Hertfordshire before he left the country. So Miss Bingley sent a letter confirming that they're not coming back, for sure not this winter. But it's still not from Bingley himself, it's still from her. So let's see. Hope was over, entirely over, and when Jane could attend to the rest of the letter, she found little except the professed affection of the writer that could give her any comfort. Miss Darcy's praise occupied the chief of it. So the whole rest of the letter was about praising Darcy's sister, which I'm pretty sure is done on purpose. They want Jane to feel this way, I think. So they're talking about Miss Darcy. Her many attractions were again dwelt on, and Caroline boasted joyfully of their increasing intimacy and ventured to predict the accomplishment of the wishes which had been unfolded in her former letter. She wrote also with great pleasure of her brother's being an inmate of Mr. Darcy's house, and mentioned with rapture some plans of the latter with regard to new furniture. So she's even saying, oh yeah, and my brother, Mr. Bingley, he's, staying with Darcy, which is where Darcy's sister is. I mean, Elizabeth, to whom Jane very soon communicated the chiefs of all this, heard it in silent indignation. Her heart was divided between concern for her sister and resentment against all the others. To Caroline's assertion of her brother's being partial to Miss Darcy, she paid no credit. So Elizabeth didn't believe it. She's like, yeah, I don't think Bingley likes Miss Darcy. There's no way. That he really was fond of Jane, she doubted no more than she had ever done, and much as she had always been disposed to like him, she could not think without anger, hardly without contempt, on that easiness of temper, that want of proper resolution, which now made him the slave of his designing friends, and led him to sacrifice his own happiness to the caprice of their inclinations. So now she's a little irritated with Bingley, like, dude, well, how could you do that? You need to worry about your happiness, not about the happiness of everybody else when it concerns him, I guess. Had his own happiness, however, been the only sacrifice, he might have been allowed to sport with it in whatever manner he thought best, but her sister's was involved in it, as she thought he must be sensible himself. It was a subject, in short, on which reflection would be long indulged, and must be unavailing. She could think of nothing else, and yet whether Bingley's regard had really died away, or were suppressed by his friend's interference, whether he had been aware of Jane's attachment, or whether it had escaped his observation, whichever were the case, though her opinion of him must be materially affected by the difference, her sister's situation remained the same, her peace equally wounded. So Elizabeth's like, dude, if Mr. Bingley was making a sacrifice of him for himself, saying, well, I really love Jane, but I'm going to sacrifice being with her to make my family and friends happy, fine. But Elizabeth's like, whoa, it's not just you who's suffering here, dude. My sister Jane, she's suffering too because of your decision, like if that's what you're deciding. So a day or two passed before Jane had courage to speak of her feelings to Elizabeth, but at last, on Mrs. Bennet's leaving them together after a long irritation than usual about Netherfield and its master, she could not help saying, oh, that my dear mother had more command over herself. She's like, oh, I wish Mom would just stop saying this and control her mouth. Oh, that my dear mother had more command over herself. She can have no idea of the pain she gives me by her continual reflections on him. But I will not repine. It cannot last long. He will be forgot, and we shall all be as we were before. Oh, poor Jane. She's like, just give me some time. I'll forget about him. Oh, man, but when it's like true love, do you really forget? Oh, man. And, we do know time heals all wounds, I think. I've heard that. So maybe she's right. Elizabeth looked at her sister with incredulous solicitude, but said nothing. You doubt me, cried Jane, slightly coloring. Indeed, you have no reason. He may live in my memory as the most amiable man of my acquaintance, but That is all. I have nothing either to hope or fear, and nothing to reproach him with. Thank God I have not that pain. A little time, therefore, I shall certainly try to get the better. She's like, well, I'll just remember him as a really cool guy and somebody I could have loved or would have loved and would have been with, but at least there's not anything else where, like, he actually did something really terrible, you know. With a stronger voice, she soon added, I have this comfort immediately, that it has not been more than an error of fancy on my side, that it has done no harm to anyone but myself. She's like, yeah, and it was probably just me. I was just maybe making it up on my own, thinking that he really liked me. My dear Jane, exclaimed Elizabeth, you are too good. Your sweetness and disinterestedness are really angelic. I do not know what to say to you. I feel as if I had never done you justice or loved you as you deserve. Miss Bennet eagerly disclaimed all extraordinary merit and threw back the praise on her sister's warm affection. Nay, said Elizabeth, this is not fair. You wish to think all the world respectable, and are hurt if I speak ill of anybody. I only want you to think you perfect, and you set yourself against it. Do not be afraid of my running into any excess, of my encroaching on your privilege of universal goodwill. She's like, would you stop it? I'm trying to tell you that you're so good, Jane, and that I love you for it, and you're just so awesome, and you don't deserve this. And Jane's like, stop, I'm not perfect. She's like, no, yeah, you are. You need not. There are few people whom I really love, and still fewer of whom I think well. The more I see of the world, the more I am dissatisfied with it, and every day confirms my belief of the inconsistency of all human characters, and of the little dependency that can be placed on the appearance of either merit or sense. I have met with two instances lately. One I will not mention, the other is Charlotte's marriage. It is unaccountable in every view. It is unaccountable. She's like, I am losing faith in people, but not you, Jane. You are so good. Like, you need to let me compliment you in that way, because it's true. She's like, everybody else, no. My dear Lizzie, do not give way to such feelings as these. They will ruin your happiness. You do not make allowance enough for difference of situation and temper. Consider Mr. Collins's respectability and Charlotte's prudent, steady character. Remember that she is one of a large family, that as to fortune, it is a most eligible match, and be ready to believe, for anybody's sake, that she may feel something like regard and esteem for our cousin. She's like, I think this is good for Charlotte. Don't be so hard on her. To oblige you, I would try to believe almost anything, but no one else could be benefited by such a belief as this. For were I persuaded that Charlotte had any regard for him, I should only think worse of her understanding than I do of her heart. She's like, what? You're telling me that Charlotte might find something agreeable in Mr. Collins? And if she does, then man, I really did not know her. I thought I knew this girl and that we had the same opinion about things, and things are just upside down in her mind, right? My dear Jane, Mr. Collins is a conceited, pompous, narrow-minded, silly man. You know he is, as well as I do, and you must feel, as well as I do, that the woman who marries him cannot have a proper way of thinking. She's like, no, Charlotte does not have a proper way of thinking. If she's going to marry that guy, she must be a lunatic. She must be crazy. You shall not defend her, though it is Charlotte Lucas. You shall not, for the sake of one individual, change the meaning of principle and integrity, nor endeavor to persuade yourself or me that selfishness is prudence, and insensibility of danger is security for happiness. She's like, no, you can't change the rules for Charlotte. There's just no way. She's being ridiculous. I must think your language too strong in speaking of both, replied Jane, and I hope you will be convinced of it by seeing them happy together. But enough of this. You alluded to something else. You mentioned two instances. I cannot misunderstand you, but I entreat you, dear Lizzie, not to pain me by thinking that person to blame, and saying your opinion of him is sunk. We must not be so ready to fancy ourselves intentionally injured. We must not expect a lively young man to be always so guarded and circumspect. It is very often nothing but our own vanity that deceives us. Women fancy admiration means more than it does. Jane is saying that women fancy admiration means more than it does, and Elizabeth says and men take care that they should. So, like, men have a fault in it as well by making women think that they want more than what they really want. So then Jane says, if it is designedly done, they cannot be justified, but I have no idea of there being so much design in the world as some persons imagine. I am far from attributing any part of Mr. Bingley's conduct to design, said Elizabeth, but without scheming to do wrong or to make others unhappy, there may be error and there may be misery. Thoughtlessness, want of attention to other people's feelings, and want of resolution will do the business. And do you impute it to either of those? Yes, to the last. But if I go on, I shall displease you by saying what I think of persons you esteem. Stop me while you can. She's like, yeah, no, I think that, Bingley is in the wrong for paying more attention to his friends and family. And she's like, but I'm going to start right there, because then I'm going to start talking bad about some people that you actually like. And she's like, stop me while you can. She says, you persist then in supposing his sisters influence him? Yes, in conjunction with his friend. I cannot believe it. Why should they try to influence him? They can only wish for his happiness, and if he is attached to me, no other woman can secure it. Your first position is false. They may wish many things besides his happiness. They may wish his increase of wealth and consequence. They may wish him to marry a girl who has all the importance of money, great connections, and pride. She's like, yeah, no. His sisters and his friend Darcy, they don't care about his happiness. They want him to be richer by marrying a rich girl. Beyond a doubt, they do wish him to choose Miss Darcy, replied Jane, but this may be from better feelings than you are supposing. They have known her much longer than they have known me. No wonder if they love her better. But whatever may be their own wishes, it is very unlikely they should have opposed their brothers. They're like, yeah, I know, they may want him to marry Miss Darcy, but because they know her. But I mean, if he doesn't want to marry her, they wouldn't push him to do that. What sister would think herself at liberty to do it unless they were something very objectionable? If they believed him attached to me, they would not try to part us. If he were so, they could not succeed. By supposing such an affection, you make everybody acting unnaturally and wrong, and me most unhappy. Do not distress me by the idea. I am not ashamed of having been mistaken. So Jane's still saying, like, I was mistaken. I thought he liked me. I guess he didn't. And Elizabeth's like, dude, that is not it. It's his sisters and Mr. Darcy that are pulling him away. She's like, no, I don't think they would do that. Or at least it is slight. It is nothing in comparison of what I should feel in thinking ill of him or his sisters. Let me take it in the best light, in the light in which it may be understood. Elizabeth could not oppose such a wish. She's like, just let me think what I want. And Elizabeth's like, fine, I guess. And from this time, Mr. Bingley's name was scarcely ever mentioned between them. So Elizabeth did not argue with her about it, but Elizabeth did tell her what she thought. She was like, dude, it's your friends, or your friends, who are pushing him away. Mrs. Bennet still continued to wonder and repine at his returning no more, and though a day seldom passed in which Elizabeth did not account for it dearly, there seemed little chance of her ever considering it with less perplexity. Her daughter endeavored to convince her of what she did not believe herself, that his attentions to Jane had been merely the effect of a common and transient liking, which ceased when he saw her no more. So Elizabeth's trying to tell the mom, like, Mom, maybe he doesn't like her as much as you thought. Maybe with Jane, it's like out of sight, out of mind. He's not thinking of her anymore because he doesn't see her. But though the probability of the statement was admitted at the time, she had the same story to repeat every day. Mrs. Bennet's best comfort was that Mr. Bingley must be down again in the summer. Mr. Bennet treated the matter differently. So, Lizzie, he said one day, your sister is crossed in love, I find. I congratulate her. Next to being married, a girl likes to be crossed in love a little now and then. Oh, it is something to think of, and gives her a sort of distinction among her companions. Oh, so he's basically saying that Jane's a little different now, because she did love at one point, or she still loves now. It gives her something to think about. When is your turn to come? Will you hardly bear to be long outdone by Jane? Now is your time. Here are officers enough at Meryton to disappoint all the young ladies in the country. Let Wickham be your man. He is a pleasant fellow, and would jilt you creditably. He's like, hey, so when are you going to be disappointed in love? What about Wickham? He can do it. All the other men are disappointing the ladies. When is it your turn? You know he's being sarcastic. Thank you, sir, but a less agreeable man would satisfy me. We must not all expect Jane's good fortune. True, said Mr. Bennet, but it is a comfort to think that whatever of that kind may befall you, you have an affectionate mother who will always make the most of it. Mr. Wickham's society was of material service in dispelling the gloom which the late perverse occurrences had thrown on many of the Longbourn family. They saw him often, and to his other recommendations was now added that of general unreserve. The whole of what Elizabeth had already heard, his claims on Mr. Darcy, and all that he had suffered from him, was now openly acknowledged and publicly canvassed. And everybody was displeased to think how much they had always disliked Mr. Darcy before they had known anything of the matter. So now that story that Mr. Wickham told about Darcy has been told to everybody. Mrs. Bennet was the only creature who could suppose there might be any extenuating circumstances in the case. I'm sorry, not Mrs. Miss. Miss Bennet was the only creature who could suppose there might be any extenuating circumstances in the case, unknown to the Society of Hertfordshire. We're talking about Jane here. Her mild and steady candour always pleaded for allowances and urged the possibility of mistakes, but by everybody else, Mr. Darcy was condemned as the worst of men. So everybody was like, yeah, no, Mr. Darcy's a dog. He totally wronged Mr. Wickham, but it's Jane who's like, I think we're missing something. Yeah, so we'll see. Maybe Jane's right. Maybe she's like smart with some things, but then like in love herself. I don't know. How could she think the Bingley sisters are just awesome girls? I don't know.